I moved to Phoenix, Arizona, not once, but twice. Two very different experiences each time. To be honest, the first time I moved here back in 2015, I was convinced I had made a terrible mistake. I'm Courtney, I'm a realtor from Real Broker, and today I'm gonna share some of the struggles and some of the mistakes that I made, so hopefully you can avoid them. Now, I moved several times throughout my life, both as a child and an adult, and I will say, every time you move, there are struggles that come up that you just can't prepare for. And it was interesting to see that each time that we moved here, we were dealing with very different struggles. In 2015, we left Fort Collins, Colorado and moved down to Mesa, Arizona. And this was primarily so my partner, Alan, could go to physical therapy school. So the plan was once he finished physical therapy school, we were gonna head back to Colorado, our home. It's funny how life works sometimes. So at the time I worked as an occupational therapist, and I actually didn't have a job when I first came down here. I was pretty blessed in the fact that I was able to find a job fairly quickly, but the catch was it was all the way up in North Phoenix and we were living in East Mesa. So you can see that's quite a bit of a commute. I was spending a lot of time in the car, particularly when I was driving home. Sometimes it would even take me an hour and a half. The traffic is not bad here in Phoenix, but it's just such a large sprawl that if you're commuting from one point of town to the other, it's gonna take you some time. You're gonna be covering a lot of ground, but there's still a lot of cars on the road. So the first time we moved here, we ultimately decided to rent because we were anticipating only on staying here for 3 years. At the time, Phoenix rentals were pretty inexpensive, so it was easy for us to find an apartment. So since Alan, my partner, was in school, we were living on one income and I did have some student loans. So this was definitely a time where we were pretty frugal. Our apartment was pretty basic. But compared to Colorado, where we were living before, Phoenix was pretty inexpensive and cost of living was low. Now, one of the biggest struggles I had when I first moved here in 2015 was the heat. We moved down here in July. It was 117 degrees and I can be somewhat sensitive to the heat overall, so this was really challenging. Now, I really love going outdoors and I just felt like I couldn't really enjoy being outside. The other thing too is my first job in Arizona was pretty demanding as far as time. I was working pretty long days, a lot of weekend days, and then on top of that, I had the commute. So I really wasn't having much free time. And it was really challenging to meet people as a result of that. Now, my partner, he had a very different experience and was able to make friends pretty quickly, but this was definitely something that was challenging when I first came here. Now, I eventually was able to change jobs. I was still having somewhat of a good commute, but my hours were a lot more reasonable, and I made really good friends with a lot of my coworkers, had more time to make friends back in Mesa where I was living, and then the weather started to cool down. This is when I started to fall in love with Phoenix. I was able to go out and hike. We eventually were able to move closer to my job. We moved to Tempe and then eventually Phoenix. So overall, my quality of life transformed quite a bit over that first 1 to 2 years that we lived in Phoenix. Now, the summers were still tough, I'll be honest. It was really my third summer that I was here in Phoenix where I felt like I truly acclimated to the heat. And then now I'm cold all the time. Now, we ultimately did decide to move back to Colorado. So all my family was out of the state of Colorado, and then a lot of our friends actually had left as well. So going back, it just wasn't the same. And it was pretty quickly that we realized Colorado was not our long-term home. For a while, we decided, okay, you know what? We want to go back to Phoenix. We miss our friends. We really did love the desert there. And when the opportunity presented itself, we jumped on it. So this was actually during COVID. So when we came back for the second time, we did have somewhat of a community already established there. We did have a great group of friends. So that was a lot easier in that regard. But the challenge we had was housing. Now, at this point, we knew that we were going to be moving to Phoenix permanently. So we were gonna buy a home. So this was 2021 and it was insane. So being out of state and looking for homes was really challenging. And to be honest, we just couldn't stand up against the cash buyers there. So we ultimately decided to rent a small apartment. So our lease did have a buyout option, but because of that, our monthly rate on that lease was pretty expensive. So we were paying, I don't even want to tell you guys, It was $1,800 for a 1-bedroom apartment in Chandler that was like 650 square feet. It was a challenge, guys. So we ended up putting in about 6 offers in homes once we moved here, but we eventually did find a home. Hooray! It was a challenging experience, and having to move twice, well, it wasn't ideal. We made it work. We also knew the traffic patterns of this city, so this way we were able to navigate and prepare for a commute a little bit better than our first time around. So something to keep in mind about commuting is Phoenix does have a really great beltway system just because we aren't enclosed by anything geographical like a ocean or mountains. So we have a pretty perfect circular system. Now within each of these beltways, we do have a pretty basic grid system. Each block is about a mile. Something to consider when you're trying to minimize your commute. So consider how far the house is from a highway, because sometimes, let's say you're in Tempe and you're commuting to Phoenix. So you can see distance-wise, that's not really far. But if you're far away from a highway, you could easily be stuck on those surface roads for 15, 20 minutes. And then if you lived further over in Mesa, but you're right off the highway, sure, you're driving a longer distance, but if you can minimize how much time you're spending on those surface streets, it may not be as bad of a commute. So if I were gonna do anything over again, the second time we moved down, I would have bought a house instead of renting and then moving again. Now, I know hindsight's 2020, but prices in homes did go up quite a bit more and things stayed pretty competitive. Now, if you're relocating to Phoenix, I would highly recommend trying to schedule a couple weekends where you can come down and really explore the city, drive around neighborhoods on the weekends or even in the evenings just to see what these areas are like. Now, it may make more sense for you to rent and then buy, yes, so you can be more confident in the location of where you're moving, the neighborhood that you're moving in. But the caveat to that is you have to move twice. You have to move all your furniture and belongings twice. So when I said I regretted not buying a house back during 2021, take that with a grain of salt because it was a very different market then than it is now. The market now, it is still somewhat of a seller's market, but it's not nearly as competitive as it was a few years ago. Another note I want to make is that Phoenix is a very friendly area. As I mentioned earlier in the video, that I have moved all across the United States and I found that Phoenix was one of the easiest places to actually meet people. I have 2 theories about this. Okay, the first theory is after COVID, I truly believe people really miss human interaction and overall people are nicer. Now, my second theory why people are very friendly here is most people that you talk to, you'll realize are also transplants. They moved here from another state. They know what it's like to be a new person and trying to make friends. So as a result of that, people are pretty friendly and are open to building new relationships. So when we first moved to Mesa too, we were kind of nestled in a lot of 55+ communities. Now this area is a great area, but we were in our 20s and we didn't really fit into this community. We eventually moved to Tempe. And then after that, we moved to Midtown Phoenix. So Tempe and Midtown Phoenix both have a younger population. There's more trendy restaurants and things to do. So that actually helps improve our quality of life as well. So the second time around, our apartment was in Chandler, and then our home that we bought is actually in Gilbert. So I would say these areas tend to be known as more family-oriented areas. They are building trendier restaurants and shopping centers, and we are seeing younger professionals move here, but by and large, I would still say by and far, it is more of a family-oriented area than, let's say, Tempe or Midtown. Not that you don't see a lot of families in either of those areas, but generally that's the consensus. Now, Phoenix is such a huge area. There's so many different communities. So if you aren't quite sure what communities you want to start researching, reach out, tell me what your interests are, what your goals are, and I'd be more than happy to help. If you have any questions or comments, please comment below. And if you found any of this helpful, please subscribe. It does help me substantially. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope to continue to be your resource for all things Phoenix.